Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. Today we're going to be talking about how to identify sources for historically informed biblical interpretation. This is a webinar offered by the ACU Online Writing Center, which provides feedback to students on papers, webinars such as this, templates for formatting your papers, answers to questions, other resources including sample papers, and today we're going to be looking at how to look at an assignment, see that there's certain information it needs to find, and walk through some of the steps of how and where to go looking to find that. So, with no further ado, let's dive into that. We're going to be looking at an assignment from BCSO 322. This is an undergraduate course on biblical interpretation, and it has a set of, as we'll see, linked assignments that require research and writing about a topic related to the Bible and a passage specifically in Christian scripture. So let's take a look at this first. So our starting point is this week 3 assignment, which actually turns out to be part of a linked set of assignments. In week 1 of this Biblical Interpretation 2 course, you're required to select a passage that catches your attention, that you are concerned, interested, wanting to dig deeper to understand what exactly is this saying, what does this mean to me, how do I feel about this, which could be good, could be bad. And there is plenty of stuff in the Bible that is designed to make you uncomfortable, and there's plenty of stuff in the Bible that may make you uncomfortable for other reasons. You need look no further than the call to give up worldly wealth to find something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable for lots of different reasons. But your goal is to find one that speaks to you in this I feel like I need to wrestle this kind of way, or like, I don't know how I feel about this, or perhaps even, I don't like this. And find what other people have written about it, and write about that, knit this together, and arrive at, okay, well, based on the information that they got, that they provided, and their arguments, and my own thoughts, here's how I feel about it now. And so, as you'll see just from looking at the assignment titles here, Week 1, you select and pick and write your preliminary reaction to a passage. Week 3, you start delving in. It's a preliminary investigation where you're like, okay, let's understand what did they mean about it, where was this being said, what kind of things factor into that. And then this is all going to be packaged in the end into a final research paper where you'll be not only expanding on the earlier work, but responding to feedback that you've gotten from your instructor or potentially from your classmates in the online discussions. So let's take a look at that week 1 assignment. And it starts with these preliminaries. Okay, you want to find some alignments and problems in a biblical passage. And specifically, you want to choose a Bible passage that raises a question or poses a problem for you. Something that you are not sure about that seems important to understand better. As you choose a passage, you should be aware that most examples and discussions in this course will relate to the New Testament, which means that there's a lot of stuff where you can get help and guidance along the way if you're working with a New Testament passage. It's not saying you can't use the Old Testament, but that you probably will find that there's more direct alignment and direct applications if you are working with a New Testament passage. So consider this a nudge, nudge. Hey, I recommend that you pick a passage from the New Testament. And this is in part because you can get awfully caught up, say that you're reading a passage in, say, the book of Leviticus, where they're talking about conquering a land and plundering and killing the inhabitants and things that, we really would rather you not be doing today. And you could have a lot about, well, what did they mean? Why was this important for that society? If you work in the New Testament, there is a whole different set of things that, for many people, will find it easier to apply to today, whereas those types of passages in the Old Testament is, not to say harder, but definitely lengthier. There tends to be a lot of extra explanation that you need to do as part of what they call a biblical exegesis. Alright, so that week 1 assignment, it's just a 1-page write-up where you identify the pass and you say, here's why I read this and go, and why that's important. So that's usually not a problem. But I do recommend strongly that you look ahead to where that's going. Because if we look at the week 3 thing, now we need to start finding what other people have written about this and to apply that. So if we look forward here, we see, identify some aspect of the historical or cultural context of your research passage that interests you. Find 2 academic secondary sources that address this and write a short paper that shows how that scholar's write-up does or doesn't link to your identity. Where are they coming from? And this could be something where they're from a different faith tradition, a different theological emphasis. For example, if you were, say, evangelical Christian and they're writing as Greek Orthodox, they might have some details speaking to them in a different way than they do to you. Or they might be working with a different translation that conveys a significantly different meaning or emphasis to you than the one that you use in your personal life or your church does. And that can and has been the source of many a dispute about what a passage means when you're working with different texts or different translations of texts. And so you find those sources, you summarize them, and then you select a couple passages from that are specifically talking about primary sources, like things from the period. Like that could be another text, it could be an inscription, it could be an artifact, or some other aspect of that. And I'll give as an example, one of my colleagues back when I was in seminary ended up doing her dissertation about slavery in the Roman Judea, now the area roughly Israel-Palestine, where people were selling their children into slavery to meet their tax obligations. It's called debt slavery. And to look at that and see the parallels in the language she saw in documents from the period with language in the New Testament. And so this is an example of her using those period texts, which included things like tax records and letters and commentaries by different authors, and using this to say, whoa, so based on this, here's how I interpret this thing. This appears to be a direct reference to that, or documenting something, and we say, okay, that was happening then. That's an example of the kind of thing you might be looking for. Primary is basically someone saying, this is what I've experienced. Secondary is okay, we're looking at primary sources, and here's how we're summarizing, synthesizing, and understanding it. Tertiary source is when you are reading those secondary sources primarily and then creating something else. And quaternary is you're mostly working with tertiary sources. So oftentimes, like the kind of textbook that you would have in a high school is usually a quaternary source. You would often have tertiary textbooks or manuals on a subject that are developed for something for specific. So, for example, a book on Baroque music could be a tertiary source, could be a quaternary source, depends how up close and personal, as it were, the scholar gets. All right. Now, want to highlight a couple details marked in the rubric. This assignment is requiring that you are discussing 2 other scholars. Their sources that they discuss must include primary sources. And you have to write about how that factors into your understanding of their views and your own. Alright, now let's look at where that's heading. With week 7, you need to synthesize what you have learned from the reading, discussion, practice, etc., and consider all this together. So you're integrating the feedback and writing a even larger paper that's supposed to include engaging with tradition. Okay, how have people understood this historically? Historical and cultural context, okay, what was going on at the time? Literary dimensions, and postmodern methods. Here's an example of some of the cultural context that might be not the context where the biblical passage was written, but when the person writing it was. So, Martin Luther, Protestant reformer. Martin Luther's ideas evolved over time. And part of this was when he presented his famous set of theses that he nailed to the church door in Nuremberg. He presented those ideas, and then we'll just say that the reaction from the Catholic Church hierarchy was not positive. And so there were some things that Martin Luther might have agreed to disagree on or say, okay, well, that's not so important to me. With the rejection wholesale of his ideas, this led to his doubling down, as it were, and this is where we ended up with at least a one-time, sometimes lingering idea of, is salvation by faith alone, or faith in works, or can you be saved just by your works? And nowadays, people will mostly agree, well, faith alone is probably going to translate into some sort of works if you are able. And there are many different ways of being able to live out that faith. But during the Protestant Reformation, people got very, very polarized and saying, no, you must have this. This alone will do. And, wars were literally fought over that. So, historical and cultural context can mean a lot based on when someone was writing and what their understanding and how that was shaped by things. And they're also, in the history of the early church, they had lots of church councils for a reason, because they had some disputes where people couldn't agree to disagree about, does God have equal natures for the Trinity? Is the Holy Spirit, a junior partner? What's going on here? And these are things where your understanding may affect how you read things that diverge significantly from the original passage. So, keeping in mind the second bullet here, where you should be visiting your question or problem that drove you to select a passage and indicating, who is it problematic for you? And that could be many different aspects of your identity. For example, if you had a passage that said, women submit to your husbands. That is something that people interpret in many different ways. And there's some denominations that use a translation of the Bible that says, hey, married people submit to your spouses, with a more equanimous thing and saying, hey, we're not trying to point out one side as being like, you're not good at this, or you need to shape up, but saying, this is a good thing to do, to respect and pay attention to you and consider your significant other's needs, wants, desires. And other people take different interpretations. And you could also look at this and say, well, hold on. I'm in a denominational tradition that we don't have that as part of our marital vows, because as a denomination we decided to use this thing instead. So there are many different ways that you could look at this. You could also look at something and say, well, going back to the question of worldly riches and giving them away, who is Jesus addressing there? Is he addressing all aspects and areas of society? Is it targeted at particular people? That's a question that you can weigh in on if it's something that gives you pause or you feel speaks particularly to some section of society. But you do need to take into account that now, for this final paper, you need to be interfacing with the work of at least 5 other scholars who bring in different perspectives. And that's one of the reasons why we're embarking on this now, to talk about looking for sources before you dive too deeply in, to make sure that you have a passage where you can find the things that you're looking for. All right. So this is going to be a fairly long paper, 6 to 10 pages, not counting the title page or references section. And you need to have all of your sources cited using APA citation, so author date. And note that we are required to point out the historical or cultural context that's key to this, the literary context, and how the details that you are choosing to analyze fit into the passage as a whole. Okay, so where might we go to start? And bear with me, you may have read ahead in the instructions and seen a suggestion for where to start. We're going to start from the beginning. So your first place for most students is going to be the ACU Distance Education portal, where you can do a search through our One Search catalog, where you look at basically everything we have at ACU that's integrated into one catalog. Now, there are strengths and weaknesses of this, of which the strength is you can search a lot. The weakness is you can search a lot, and you may got lots of stuff that you then need to filter out to find the things that you can actually use or that are of most interest to you. So this is the very broad approach. Now you might also go to the ACU Library Database Guide, where you can see different resources that are available, that these are databases that specialize in a particular resource. And let's go ahead and look at that in the web browser. Okay, so we have here alphabetically sorted databases. So if you were planning on a academic direction that would involve a lot of research, it would not be a bad idea to read through this just to get a sense of what's out there. But probably if you're working on an undergrad assignment, you want to get something more focused. So you might try a word search and search for Bible. In which case, oh hey, Anchor Yield Bible Dictionary, that might be useful. Bible Odyssey, oh, that also sounds like it might be useful. And, okay, well, maybe I want to go and search in this search box here. It does say search this guide after all. And I search for Bible, and oh, hey, turns out our library director has written some things about these different things that, and we could say, oh, multi-volume critical commentary, that does sound like it might be helpful. Ministry Matters, that's more on the, like, applied, like, pastoring kind of thing. But let's say we went to this one here, and we start looking around and say, hey, well, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Let's say I decide I want to look up a passage from Ephesians. Now, while that link didn't take us exactly where we were planning, it took us to the Bloomsbury Collections database, where we can search that and we could use our filters to find it here. But we're looking for things like social context and, hey, actually, interpretation, gender evangelicals, that might be something important. Ephesians, an Introduction and Study Guide, Being a Christian at Home and in the Cosmos. Well, that's possibly. But let's go ahead and take a look at this one here. Now, this particular one, and we need to log in for a little bit, but just looking at the extract, you can see, hold on, that this is looking at how the context has changed how different passages are focused on, especially in the context of missionary studies. Okay, sure. But if we were to take a look at this assignment here for week 3, there is a more specific thing. Okay, so we're not looking at just every sources. We want it specifically to be academic. All right, so it turns out that ACU has a special guide on historical and systematic theology for academic sources that are related to this very topic. And so we can take a look at that and see, okay, historical systematic theology, great. We have a library staff person. Craig is specifically the person whose job is help students on this topic. So if you needed help, you can always write other people in the library, but Craig is the person who's the in-house expert. and you can contact them directly via email. But we see here a couple recommended resources. Oh, Dictionary of Historical Theology, Encyclopedia. So if you're just trying to get like an overview, great. But what if you are looking for not a reference book, but you want to go and find scholarly journal articles? Now, let's differentiate between online journals, so those collect articles, but we want to search, like find specific articles here. And so here we have some databases that will enable you to access stuff. And that's where our recommended resource, ATLA. So ATLA is a wonderful database to let you jump past a lot of that filtration that you would have to do if you were looking in OneSearch for this. So you can see as I started typing in, it's suggesting specific passages. So let's say that the text you identified, the passage that interests you, was Ephesians 2, 1-10. Well, since it suggests that, I think other people have been searching for it, so I can probably find something there. And you'll see a whole bunch here, a lot. And in fact, far more than we have time for, 455. So we can be more specific. Okay, we want to see something that's peer-reviewed. Great. Still have 356 results. Full text, meaning we can access it immediately. Great. That hasn't reduced it, but it's good to know. And then we can look and see, do we want to add an additional search term and refine the search? Do we want to add a date restriction for more recent things? Do we want to add oh, hey, here's a hot topic. Immigration and native rights. What does it mean to be a people with roots in an area? That is certainly a hot topic today. Let's say you chose that one, and we type this in. We can see, all right, here's a link to access it, but also we have this handy PDF full text link here on the side. So as we look at this, we want to find some information about this person. They are a professor in a department of missiology at a university in South Africa. So that tells us a bunch of things right away. And they're talking about immigration in their country. Now, this could be a really interesting comparative thing because it's a general circumstance that parallels, say, immigration in the United States today. There are people coming to this regional country, and there are some tensions that have happened, and they're talking about how to apply this. And so if you were looking for something that would provide a comparative perspective in a different context, this would be great. Mm-hmm. And this might be something where you say, yes, I like this so much that I'm going to refine my search and focus on this immigration aspect and feed that back into my database search at ATLA. They also give you these keywords, which is a great way to start and say, oh, hold on. Maybe I want to search for Ephesians 2, 11-12, church, and immigrants. For national, that's going to be a term that's used more for, the last 50 years or something. But immigrants, that's been used for a long time. And so let's say you select this one and say, okay, great. This is the authors I want to use here because they're talking about how to apply that. And we have these sources that they discuss that you might delve into. So while this is a author who is writing and citing other people's research, you can certainly refer to the things they did. So in your citation, Talbot 2007, as cited by Magazi 2022. So that's not a problem. You can identify the different authors that they were using in that way. By the way, if you are using this to help build out your references, just be aware that for APA style, you would be putting this in parentheses, and there'll be C period, space, open parentheses, 2022, close parentheses, period, and then no quotation marks around this. But otherwise, that would be a period. Otherwise, it's just a minor set of updates to change this into APA style. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to the Online Writing Center. Okay, so let's say we are grabbing this article here. We back up to our searches and we say, okay, you know what? I would like to have that passage in Ephesians. And keep in mind, I was originally searching for that, but this author is focusing on this. And I say, okay, that's the passage I want. All right, let's update our search there. Look at that. Oh, I want to have that immigrants search term in there. All right, that's a much more narrow thing. 18 sources, I can look through and I can look at their abstracts or glance at the introduction and see if that's something that I am interested in here. And if we look at this, you might say, okay, you know what? I've got one contemporary. I would like something that's a period source. And so this is a letter to the Ephesians, the people who lived in Ephesus. So let's put in that city name. And now we have, more of a focus on that applying the meaning in that time. And we get a different set of results. And so if you're not finding things that you feel, I really believe it should be out there, you can always go ahead and contact the librarian who's in charge of that, which in this case would again be our library liaison, Craig. All right. So your goal here is to find first a passage that speaks to you with this problem or question, this thing you feel like you need to wrestle with. Find some sources that you'll write about in the week 3 paper, and make sure that there's enough that you can, without trouble, be able to write that final 6 to 10 page paper where you need at least 5 sources on that. And you can see that we can take this passage and by modifying our search terms end up with a different set of results. So if we're doing a search for Ephesians here with Romans and historical, because we're looking, okay, well, what did this mean in that time? Then we can find more results from that according to what we are looking for. So this is talking about the ethics of land. Slightly different direction, but definitely relevant to immigration and understanding that passage in that context. Now, let's look at one more here. So again, same passage, but if we were looking at this and say, okay, models for partnership, that is going in another direction. And I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So this is talking about it in a different aspect. And what I want to point out is that this may not be, like every result that you get from your search may not be relevant to the problem that you're trying to wrestle with. So you don't want to look around and say, do I feel that I can get that 6 resources I was looking for? And that might involve modifying your search to say, oh, hold on, let's see if Roman Empire specifically comes up. So let's back our way through and talk about the different resources we've discussed. We started with this assignment and looked at how it's actually a set of 3 interlinked assignments. The first one is select the passage that you're going to be writing about and just tell us an idea of, why is this grabbing you? What's the thing that you feel needs some unpacking or wrestling with, or you're just like, I don't feel great about that. The week 3 assignment is when you start delving into, okay, how has this been interpreted and applied through the years, including when it was first written and potentially today. Your views are doubtless going to be views of today, but there are other ones as well. And then this is ultimately going to lead into writing a 6 to 10 page research paper where you're having a dialogue where you're synthesizing the different inputs of at least 5 other authors talking about their context and interpreting or applying it or explaining what it means to them and why. So in terms of looking, well, most of the time you would be starting with our ACU1 search for research inquiries. In this case, we have such a depth of scholarship that it's helpful to go to something more specific. And you could browse the ACU library databases, but because historical and systematic theology is something that we specifically have a guide on, and that we have a librarian who is an expert on helping students find research in this, I would look at this, and even if you're plugging your searches into Atla, if you are not finding exactly what you're looking, make an appointment with our librarian liaison, and then they can help you know what other databases are helpful to look in, because not everything is in Atla, and there are also some fantastic resources that might guide you to where else to look. Let's finish, before we wrap up, with a quick look at one of those. So again, we are looking at the Library Guide for Historical and Systematic Theology. And if we just look at the online databases, you'll see that there are things like, New Testament abstracts. That's a lot of research. We have research in philosophy. You know what? We're going to go with New Testament abstracts here. And we'll just search for Ephesians chapter 2 for the moment. Okay, so that brought us one result. That's narrower than I think we want there. So 60 results. That probably means that there's more stuff out there, but if you're getting no results, that would be something where I'd want to either talk with the librarian or find another passage. Now, if we're looking at this, this is a passage within. So this is the kind of thing where if you're looking for commentary on a specific passage, you might want to refine your search, because searching for Ephesians 2:11-12 won't necessarily come up with 2:15a just because of how the search engine works. But if you're trying to find that and you're not, again, talk with the library liaison. Let's say that you read this article, and this happens to be an author who is engaging with the discussion about the Catholic Church and famous theologian Marcus Barth. And you might look through this and see, hold on, there's a source there that's one that I want to go and read that, and that ultimately becomes one of yours. So you can certainly follow people's citations to see what other people have written about this. But because this is a undergraduate course, multiple assignments with the relatively fast turnaround, it is helpful to not have to go down to too many rabbit holes. So when you are searching, you will probably want to be starting with one of these databases first. Definitely use Atla, but as you're trying to expand to get the rest of the sources you need for the final paper, you might find that you get more results if you go to one of these other ones. Okay, well, that is all we have time for today. So if you have questions, feel free to email us at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can go to my.acu.edu and under Academic Resources, access the Online Writing Center portal to schedule an appointment. And you can go to the Online Writing Center website for these and other videos. And with that, I bid you good night.